This video is sponsored by Keeps. More on them later. Getting maximum value out of a video game has been a problem that has persisted since the very first time one was sold for money. Hey, I'm sure the same applied to physical forms of entertainment, and maybe Nintendo had the same problems they do these days with video games that they had when they were making Hanafuda cards, but generally, it's a constant battle for games to justify their cost. Most older games were just made really hard to offset how quickly you'd be able to beat them otherwise, and even though games have since gotten longer, it's an issue that has persisted all the way to current year. So what do you do if a game doesn't have enough content to keep you interested? You play it differently. I mean, what do you have to lose? We'll be scratching the surface of just how many different ways there are of playing a video game very shortly, but it's worth remembering that these sort of challenges have been around for about 35 years or so, coincidentally, the age at which 2 out of 3 guys will reach having experienced some form of male pattern baldness. But luckily, this video is sponsored by Keeps with their FDA-approved treatment for hair loss. Let's be honest here, hair loss is the ultimate challenge of life, and I wish it was optional. Given the choice, not the sort of challenge I would participate in, since I've got enough to think about as is, but if, like me, you don't fancy looking like your dad, who is currently doing an exceptional impression of an egg, then we should be thankful for today's sponsors, Keeps. These people are supremely talented when it comes to preventing hair loss with their FDA-approved treatment that comes with many years of experience and a large number of successful cases under their belts. In fact, they know so much about hair loss that they're aware that men experience hair loss differently, which is why their treatment comes in 3 different variants depending on what kind of hair loss you're having. Plus, you can get everything shipped directly to your door so you don't have to wait for the world to not be so terrible before you can fix your hair. Keeps' treatment packages are already cheaper than their competitors, but with the deal they're running with me here today, you can save even more money. For a limited time offer, you can go to keeps.com/rabbid or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. Stop hair loss now before it's too late. Okay then, I guess we need to make games really hard now, don't we? In my new ventures of overcoming my addiction to ranking things, I find myself once again wondering how I'm going to do this video. And still don't really know, but I think the best place to start is with the more generic challenges that can be applied to most games out there, before eventually dipping into game-specific stipulations, because those ones, they're really good. That way, we should be able to cover all the more general stuff in a way that isn't too confusing to follow along with at home. With that in mind, the most common style of self-imposed challenge is also the easiest to explain, and speedrunning has never been more popular than it is right now. I might dive a little deeper on this in a future video, but as part of a self-imposed challenge, the simplest thing you can do with a game is try to beat it as fast as possible. The extra appeal of speedruns is that a lot of games out there have numerous different ways to play them quickly, and if you don't fancy using glitches to forge the ideal path through a game, then there's glitchless categories, or 100% completion, or lowest percent, which is just a lot, ironically. But hey, if you feel like you've mastered a game, you might as well, right? And if your skills are so good that you can beat a game in your sleep, then why not try a pacifist run? Again, simple rules, don't kill anything in the game. And this is the sort of challenge where the viability fluctuates a lot depending on what kind of game you're playing. Like, Animal Crossing? Yeah, that's easy. Pokemon? Again, easy, because they're only fainting. At least for now. Call of Duty? Possible, but kinda dull, because you're relying on your squad mates getting the kills for you. Assassin's Creed? Come on now. It's a challenge that was born from stealth games where you can defeat opponents non-lethally, and so it does find more traction in a game designed to house a pacifist playstyle like Metal Gear or Splinter Cell. Quite often there'll be scripted kills that you can't bypass without glitches, and so it becomes more of a case of how few kills are required to beat a game. Pushing the boundaries of what a game can accommodate is kinda what these challenges are all about, and if it can promote some pacifism on the world at the same time, then damn, that's pretty magical. The inverse, or at least part of the same family tree as pacifist runs, are permadeath runs. Less about no kills and more like no deaths, because nothing says realism more than making one major fuck up and having to start all over again from scratch. In a standard game, this obviously adds a ton of difficulty and can help make easier games more of a challenge, but survival games become altogether more terrifying. Something like Minecraft or Don't Starve with their permadeath mode switched on are suddenly very scary to play, with every enemy encounter potentially being your last, and it really does add an extra layer of punishing difficulty into the mix. As a self-imposed challenge, you're merely taking that difficulty and putting it somewhere unfamiliar, and if you want to delete your save file every time you die, then go right ahead. If you're after a different form of difficulty that isn't quite as punishing as permadeath, then we could always break out the alternative controllers. Takes a bit of creativity and some understanding of how to get these games working with bizarre controllers. Both kind of recognized, like using a DDR pad to beat Celeste, or the bongos from Donkey Konga to squeeze your way through Sekiro, and completely insane ideas like sticking some wires in a potato so you can play Skyrim, and this one absolute madman who programmed Super Mario World to recognize certain pitches and can now control Mario with his nose recorder. Throw in some other unique restrictions like blindfolded runs or mapping every input onto a voice command, and I think it's safe to say that there's more than a few ways of playing a game in a weird way. The last stipulation I want to mention that can be applied to a bunch of different games is a little more specific, but one of the most satisfying things you can do, and that is turning off the minimap. Not every game lets you do it, and in some games I wouldn't recommend it, but there are some games out there that become completely different experiences without a minimap to guide you. The two games that became immeasurably better when I turned the minimaps off were Breath of the Wild and Red Dead Redemption 2 for broadly the same reasons. To put it simply, not knowing for sure where you are helps you to lose yourself in this world and embrace a more organic form of figuring out your location, like looking out for signposts and significant landmarks. Wanna go see what the Gorons are cooking? Maybe head towards the giant volcano. It's the sign of a well-designed video game that you can turn off a lot of aids and still have a good chance of working out where you are and where you need to go next. And if you genuinely don't know, there's no rush to find out when you've got views like this. Frankly, the king of challenge runs is Pokemon, and it has been for some time now. It makes a lot of sense why Pokemon is so popular for self-imposed challenges, since having so many critters to choose from already sets the game up for a huge amount of replayability, but even then, there's only so much you can do before you've done it all. Swinging in to save the day then is the Nuzlocke challenge that goes some way towards completely recontextualizing the relationship you have with your party of dangerous monsters, since, as I'm sure you will know by now, any time a Pokemon runs out of HP they are considered dead and can never be used again. Pokemon has a funny relationship with difficulty, since while you might think you could waltz your way through an adventure with minimal danger to your Pokemon's well-being, these games have a nasty habit of throwing around a couple of harsh difficulty spikes, and if your entire party dies to one of these spikes, then that's game over for you, my friend. It kinda sets the tone that the original Nuzlocke that gave the challenge its name was a failure, since, spoilers for a 12-year-old webcomic? Nick Franco lost to the champion in Pokemon Ruby. Oh, you know it's gotta be hard now. So hard that it's probably more challenging than a solo run, which is fairly self-explanatory. Instead of stacking your team with 6 powerful Pokemon, you limit yourself to just one, and usually something unconventional and unglamorous like a Wooper or a Stunfisk. I don't need to explain too much because it doesn't actually change a lot about how you play Pokemon beyond pouring all of your attention and experience points into one very strong boy, but I do like how you don't have to worry too much about being overleveled. If you're soloing an entire game with a weaker Pokemon, then you're basically required to grind up to a level that is way higher than any other Pokemon that you'll encounter through the story, and it is a lot of fun, basking in the glory of conquering the Elite Four with your unstoppable monster. The slightly easier variation of a solo run is an unevolved run, where there's no major restrictions apart from not being able to evolve Pokemon. So either you end up with a team full of baby Pokemon at absurdly high levels, or you end up using Pokemon that just don't evolve, with the obvious exception of legendary Pokemon, which would just make the entire thing a joke. For me, this all meant that I was forced into using Pokemon that I wouldn't usually consider using, and when I did one run recently of Pokemon Black, I ended up relying on a Sigilyph, and I never knew that Sigilyph was capable of hard carrying my team through so many obstacles. Never expected to be so reliant on whatever the hell this is. Nuzlocke's been around for more than a decade, which may sound like a long time for a challenge, but I'm pretty sure the 3 Heart Challenge from The Legend of Zelda has been around since the first game came out in 1986. It's another one of those challenges where the rules are relatively simple, but what the challenge does for the game is fairly complex. In any Zelda game where you start with 3 hearts worth of health, you're not allowed to increase your health through picking up heart containers or heart pieces, and must instead beat the entire game on 3 hearts. There's added caveats like how a handful of Zelda games make it kind of impossible to do this, since picking up heart containers after defeating bosses is required to trigger events within the story, and some Zelda games like Skyward Sword give you 6 hearts at the start instead, because clearly you cannot be trusted to survive such a brutal game with the usual 3 hearts. But what this challenge does is completely change how you approach most obstacles in Zelda games. The margin of error is reduced dramatically, since most attacks do half a heart of damage, and if you're not managing your health correctly, then you'll whittle through those hearts in no time at all. Special mention if you're a nutcase and decide to do a 3-heart run of any Zelda game that also has some kind of mode where you take double damage, and extra special consideration for Twilight Princess HD for having a hero mode, and a Ganondorf amiibo which combo together for taking 4 times the amount of damage as usual. You try that with a 3-heart run and most attacks one-shot you. We're getting Dark Souls up in this bitch. I said that 3-heart runs likely date back to 1986 when the first Zelda game came out, and while I don't know this for certain, I do know that swordless runs definitely started with this game. Sounds completely insane, doesn't it? You're saying that you can complete this game without its most iconic moment, without ever going into that first cave on the first screen of the first Zelda game, and without ever talking to the old man with one of the most memorable quotes in all of gaming? Yeah, it's mostly completely optional, since there are other ways of doing consistent damage like the magical rod, and you only ever need the sword for defeating Ganon, so you can play like 99% of Zelda 1 without seemingly its most important weapon. There aren't many other Zelda games where this is possible outside of doing some crazy things with glitches, but with Breath of the Wild being so open to player choice, it's absolutely possible to go through this game without a sword or even a conventional weapon. You'll probably be using a lot of bombs or some spiky Lino shields, but if you've come here looking for practicality, I'm afraid I have nothing of the sort to offer you. What I can offer you is a minimalist run, which is like a swordless run, but with more accessibility for other games, and yet as restrictive as you're willing to go. The baseline is as restrictive on health as a 3-heart run, but the aim of a minimalist run is to beat the game with as few items as possible, with that particular rule being as strict as you'd like if you're willing to embrace some glitches. For example, using the right glitches in Ocarina of Time can see you picking up a bottle, the Deku shield or hammer, and either a Deku stick or the Kokiri sword, so just 3 items. Glitchless, it's a little less drastic, but you're still leaving behind the Lens of Truth, 2 of the magic spells, all item upgrades, all masks, all bottles, and even something like the fire arrows. Again, Breath of the Wild shines here, and it really comes down to how much of your life you want to be spending using bombs in combat. I've got dreams and plans, so yeah, not for me, thank you. Beating Majora's Mask in one cycle though, oh yeah, now we're talking. This challenge is like the perfect balance of a bunch of different concepts, since its very nature requires you to get a wiggle on, as once you're initially taught the Song of Time and sent back to the first day, you're never allowed to play it again. So it comes down to what is truly required to beat Majora's Mask, which pretty much boils down to beating the 4 dungeons and then getting up to that moon as quickly as possible. And if you want to use some glitches so that required items like Epona's song can be skipped, then you go right ahead, sir. It's kind of insane to think about, since time manipulation is such a huge part of Majora's Mask, but with enough game knowledge and intense mapping out of your route through the game, it's 100% doable. Not to any sense of 100% completion though, which means that if you think too hard about it, you're racing through the game and leaving behind a lot of miserable NPCs. I've won, but at what cost? Most of what I've discussed in this video thus far can be reapplied to other games. Obviously any game can be speed ran, and with a bit of thought there's probably some items that can be made optional, but I want to put forward Grand Theft Auto for having one of the most strangely satisfying self-imposed challenges I've ever seen in a game. There's a ton of fun to be had in Grand Theft Auto under normal circumstances, as its very nature is highly chaotic and borderline anarchistic, and with additions like GTA Online and its very creative modding scene, there's enough here to give Grand Theft Auto some hefty replay value. That being said, I reckon I get more joy than most when it comes to the challenge known as Law-Abiding Citizen, which, incredibly, asks you to play the game as legally as possible. That means no murder, no carjacking, you even, technically, have to stop at red lights if you want to play properly. And there's something a little mesmerizing about playing GTA like this. It's like leading a hungry dog through a butcher's shop. The sheer willpower to not engage with what you're supposed to be doing in this situation honestly puts me in this weird meditative state. Like, I reach this zen frame of mind where I'm completely relaxed and immersed in this world of driving properly. You got the choice of either attempting to beat the whole game like this, at which point you may run into an issue or two during story missions that require you to commit crimes to progress, but you could instead just adopt a law-abiding playstyle as part of free roaming the world. I won't lie to you, it's honestly a little bit life-changing. So obviously I haven't talked about every type of self-imposed challenge that anyone has ever done, because that hypothetical list is virtually endless, but hopefully I've at least covered a good spread. Many of these will be fairly well known, but maybe there was something in this video that you hadn't heard of before. In which case, I implore you to try some of these out for yourself and see how it can change the way you see a game that you may know really well. The aim with most challenges is to make a game more difficult, but I think a game having the possibility to be played in a different way helps you to have a greater appreciation for some of the game design decisions that otherwise may have gone unnoticed. It's not just about replayability, it's about loving something for a new reason. All of these self-imposed challenges hinge on the strength of their communities and how their collective creativity has given rise to some incredibly weird things. Makes me wonder where we're going to go in the future. Only when we're beating Elden Ring blindfolded using only a stick of celery, only then will we know what too far looks like. This is RabbidLuigi, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future. And if you want to watch a video right here, there's a video right here about the worst gaming consoles of all time. I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Sarah Mallion, Christopher Robinson, and the Green Scorpion. Thank you for watching, and now watch this video without sound and try to keep up.